Let me ask you something. When you get out of bed in the morning, are your first few steps stiff and creaky until you warm up? Do your knees crack when you climb the stairs? Has getting up from a low, soft chair quietly become more of a production than it used to be? Do your joints seem to know when the weather's about to change? If you're nodding along to any of these, you are in very good company. These are some of the most common experiences people share as they get older, and most people have a simple explanation for it. My joints are just wearing out. It's all downhill from here. But here's the thing. That explanation is mostly wrong, and the real reason your joints feel stiff is far more hopeful than you've been led to believe. Because a huge part of what we blame on old joints isn't actually damage to the joint at all. It's something else entirely. And unlike simple wear and tear, it's something you have real power over. So let's get into it. This is what's really happening inside your joints, and the surprising truth about why they feel the way they do. First, let's clear up the biggest myth, because it shapes how everyone thinks about this. The popular image is that your joints are like the tires on a car. You get a fixed amount of tread, you wear it down with use, and eventually you're driving on bald rubber. By this logic, using your joints wears them out faster, so you should rest them to make them last. This idea is almost entirely backwards, and believing it causes real harm. Your joints are not passive mechanical parts wearing down from use. They are living tissues that respond and adapt to how you treat them, and one of the worst things you can do to a joint is stop moving it. So while there are real, normal changes that happen in aging joints, the catastrophic wearing out story is a myth. And once you understand what's actually going on inside, you'll see why movement is medicine, not damage. So let's open up a joint and look at what's really there. Let's start with cartilage, because this is what most people think of when they think of joint trouble. Cartilage is the smooth, slippery, rubbery tissue that caps the ends of your bones where they meet, letting them glide against each other almost frictionlessly. Over the years, it's true that cartilage can gradually thin and become less resilient. This is a genuine part of aging, and significant cartilage loss is the basis of osteoarthritis, the most common joint condition. But here's the crucial and hopeful part. Cartilage health depends heavily on movement. Cartilage has no direct blood supply of its own. Instead, it's nourished by the fluid inside your joint, and the only way that nourishing fluid gets pressed into the cartilage to feed it is through movement and gentle loading of the joint. Every time you move a joint, you're essentially pumping nutrients into the cartilage and squeezing waste out, like squeezing and releasing a sponge underwater. So when people stop moving a stiff joint to protect it, they actually starve the cartilage of its nourishment, and it deteriorates faster. Movement is how cartilage stays fed and healthy. And this connects directly to that morning stiffness you might recognize. So let's answer that morning stiffness question, because the explanation is reassuring. When you've been still for a long time, overnight in bed, or sitting for a couple of hours, the fluid in your joints becomes thicker and less mobile, and the joint tissues are, in a sense, resting. When you first get up, the joint hasn't yet been warmed up. The fluid is still thick, circulation is low, and the surrounding muscles are cold and tight. That's why the first steps feel stiff and creaky. But notice what happens next. After a few minutes of moving, the stiffness eases. That's because movement warms the joint, thins and circulates the lubricating fluid, and gets everything gliding again. This pattern, stiff after rest, better with movement, is one of the most common and usually most benign joint experiences of getting older. It's not your joint crumbling. It's a joint that simply needs to be woken up and moving. and it points to the real culprit behind much of what we blame on old joints, which surprises almost everyone. Here's the part that genuinely changes how people think about this. A huge amount of the stiffness, weakness, and instability we attribute to aging joints actually comes not from the joint itself, but from the muscles around it. As we age, if we're not actively maintaining them, we lose muscle mass and strength, a process that accelerates with each passing decade, especially if we're sedentary, and your joints depend enormously on those muscles. The muscles around a joint are its support system, its shock absorbers, and its stabilizers. Strong muscles take pressure off the joint, absorb impact before it reaches the cartilage, and keep the joint aligned and stable. When those muscles weaken, the joint is left poorly supported. It takes more direct load, it feels less stable, and it aches more. So that knee that hurts going upstairs. Very often, a major part of the problem is that the muscles supporting the knee have weakened, not that the knee joint itself is ruined. This is fantastic news because while you can't easily reverse cartilage loss, you absolutely can rebuild muscle strength at any age. The body's ability to build muscle in response to exercise continues throughout life. Strengthen the muscles around a joint, and very often the joint feels dramatically better. And that crunching and cracking you might hear raises its own question. Let's address those clicks, cracks, and pops because they worry people more than almost anything. That sound your knees make when you squat, or your joints make when you stretch. The medical term is crepitus. And here's the reassuring truth. In the vast majority of cases, painless joint cracking and popping is completely harmless. It's often just gas bubbles forming and collapsing in the joint fluid, or tendons and ligaments gently sliding over the joint structures as you move. If there's no pain and no swelling accompanying the noise, it is almost never a sign of damage, no matter how alarming it sounds. The key distinction to remember is pain. Noise alone is usually nothing to worry about. Noise combined with pain, swelling, or the joint catching and locking is a different matter and worth getting checked. But the simple soundtrack of a crackly knee on its own is one of the most common and most harmless parts of having a body that's been well used. So you can stop worrying every time your knees announce that you're standing up. And understanding all this leads to the most important question: what actually helps? So let's talk about what genuinely protects and improves your joints, because this is where the hopeful science comes together. The single most important thing, the one that addresses nearly everything we've discussed, is movement and strength. Regular movement keeps your cartilage nourished, your joint fluid flowing, and your range of motion preserved. Strength training, and this is crucial at every age, rebuilds the muscles that support and protect your joints, which is often the biggest factor in how good or bad a joint feels. Low-impact activities are wonderful for this. Walking, swimming, cycling, and gentle strength work all load the joints enough to keep them healthy without pounding them. The second major factor is body weight, because every extra pound of body weight places several times that load on your knees with each step. So managing weight significantly reduces the stress on your lower body joints. Staying hydrated supports your joint fluid, and a balanced diet supports the whole system. Notice the theme. Almost everything that helps your joints is something within your control, and almost none of it involves simply resting and waiting for them to wear out. The joint you move and support is the joint that stays younger. But it's just as important to know when something needs more than self-care. So let's be clear and responsible about the warning signs, because knowing the difference between normal and concerning is genuinely important. The everyday experiences we've described, stiffness after rest that eases with movement, painless cracking, mild aches that come and go, are usually a normal part of an aging, well-used body. But certain signs deserve a proper medical evaluation, and you shouldn't tough these out. See a doctor if you have joint pain that's severe, that persists and doesn't improve, or that wakes you at night. A joint that's significantly swollen, red, or hot to the touch. A joint that locks, gives way, or that you genuinely can't use, or pain that follows an injury. These can signal conditions that benefit enormously from proper diagnosis and treatment, and getting them looked at early often leads to far better outcomes. Listening to your body isn't about anxiously cataloging every creak. It's about knowing that while most everyday stiffness is benign and manageable, the louder alarms deserve a professional's attention. There's no prize for suffering through something that a doctor could help with. So let's bring it all together, because the real story of your joints is far more encouraging than the myth. The popular idea that your joints simply wear out like old tires and that you should rest them and brace for inevitable decline is mostly wrong. Yes, cartilage changes with age, but cartilage is fed by movement, not preserved by stillness. That morning stiffness is usually just a cold joint waiting to be warmed up. The cracking is usually harmless, and a huge share of what we blame on bad joints actually comes from weakened muscles around the joint, something you can rebuild at any age. The real reason your joints feel stiff, more often than not, isn't irreversible damage. It's an aging body that has been moving too little and losing the muscular support its joints depend on. And that means the power to feel better is genuinely, largely in your hands and in your habits. Your joints aren't a clock running down. They're living tissue, waiting to respond to how you treat them, which leads to a natural question about another part of you that changes with the years, and that worries people even more than their knees. We've seen how much control you have over your joints, but what about your memory? When you forget a name or walk into a room and forget why, is that the same kind of normal change or something to fear? The truth about your aging brain is just as surprising and reassuring as the truth about your joints, and it's the story waiting for you in the video on screen right now.